Hello, fifth graders. This is now the part 2 of our lesson on Americans and the Revolution. From the previous part, we've learned that friends and families were divided over which side to support in the Revolutionary War, and we also found out that they suffered many personal and economic hardships. All right, so in this part, class, we're going to discover the important women or women who played many different important roles in the Revolutionary War. All right, so let's begin with a learning objective. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to explain the roles of women, African Americans, and Native Americans during the war. Women and the war. As I mentioned, grade 5, we're going to find out the roles and the contribution of women during the Revolutionary War. As men left their homes, class, to fight in the war, women took on new roles. Some women ran family farms or businesses. Others raised money for the war and collected clothing for the soldiers. And from the previous lesson, grade 5, we also learned that women had played important roles in colonial protest of British policies before the war. For example, if you still remember, they joined the Daughters of Liberty, they boycotted British goods, and they wove their own clothes to support the boycotts. All right, so now we're going to find out the roles in the battle and at home. Some wives followed their husbands from battle to battle. For example, every winter when the armies were in their winter quarters, Martha Washington traveled to be with her husband, George. Obviously, grade 5, Martha Washington is the wife of George Washington, who was the commander-in-chief of all military forces. Right? In army camps, class, women cooked their food and washed their clothes, and some brought water to soldiers during the battles. Okay, and this is Martha Washington with her husband, George Washington. All right, so let's move to the next slide. Next in line, grade 5, is Sybil Ludington. Some girls and women joined the men in battle. Like Sybil Ludington, she rode more than 40 miles or 64 kilometers just to tell Americans of a British attack. Okay, next one, we have Deborah Sampson. She pretended to be a man, grade 5, and dressed in men's clothes so that she could fight during the war. During that time, class, women were still denied the rights to vote in elections or run for the public office or even own property. Okay, so here is Deborah Sampson. All right. What about Margaret Corbin? Margaret Corbin, grade 5, was wounded after taking her husband's place during the battle. Actually, she became the first woman veteran to be recognized by Congress. Okay, when you say veteran, it is a person who has served in the military. If you are familiar of Molly Pitcher in your English lesson, her life is almost the same with Molly Pitcher, or known as Mary Hayes. Remember, her husband William Hayes collapsed or was wounded. She also took her husband's place in the gun crew for the rest of the battle. All right, so that's Margaret Corbin. And what about Mercy Otis Warren? Other women class used their talents to support the patriot cause, like Mercy Otis Warren. She wrote poems and stories about people fighting for freedom. And then later, she wrote a history of the American Revolution, which was the first by a woman. Next is Abigail Adams. She argued for freedom in letters she wrote to her husband, John. On her letter, grade 5, she reiterated that the Congress should recognize the rights of women. Remember that during that time, women had limited rights. So some women, like Abigail Adams, she participated in politics indirectly by advising their husbands or hosting political meetings in their homes. And also, she cared for children who were made homeless by the war. Okay, so how did women grade 5 take part in the Revolutionary War? Yes, some took places of their wounded husbands and they wanted to join the fight for independence. Now in this part of the lesson grade 5, we're going to find out African Americans fought on both sides in the war. Many enslaved people were promised their freedom in exchange for fighting. Actually, grade 5, at the start of the war, 1 of every 5 people in the 13 colonies was of African descent. Okay, so let's learn the promise of freedom. Close to 5,000 enslaved African Americans fought for the Continental Army. Many were promised their freedom as a reward for their service, and this promise was made to the soldiers of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment. For example, James Armstead, an enslaved person from Virginia, was a spy for George Washington. So when you say spy, he's the person who keeps secret watch on a person or thing to obtain or to get information. So the information grade 5 that Armstead collected helped the Americans win in an important battle at Yorktown, Virginia. And after the war was over, the Virginia government gave Armstead his freedom. But grade 5, just to tell you, you might think that all African Americans who fought in the war were given their freedom. Some enslaved African Americans won their freedom through their service, but many others on both sides did not and had to return to slavery after the war. Before discussing this part, the British Governor Grade 5 of Virginia promised freedom to all enslaved people who fought for the British. His group of more than 300 African American soldiers wore patches that said liberty to slaves. Okay, so let's find out who are the free African Americans in battle. Free African Americans also took sides, like Peter Salem was among at least 5 African Americans who fought the British at the Battle of Concord. He also fought at Bunker Hill, and also James Forten from Philadelphia was just 14 years old when he joined the Continental Navy. So this is Peter Salem, and this one is James Forten. Okay, so let's answer this question. Why did some enslaved African Americans fight in the Revolutionary War? It's very simple. They fought in exchange for their freedom. People in the West. When the war began, class, many Native Americans remained neutral, meaning to say they did not support or help either side in a conflict or disagreement. So most white settlers in the West or the lands west of the Appalachian Mountains also remained neutral. So who were the new alliances? Native Americans were soon divided by the war. Many groups eventually sided with the British, and in 1777, for example, the Mohawk agreed to help the British. And their leader, Thayendanegea, known as Joseph Brant, hoped to stop settlers from moving west. Then the groups such as Oneida and Tuscarora fought for the Americans. The feelings of many Western settlers class also changed. Many did not support the Patriot cause, but they wanted to help drive the British out of their lands. Okay, so to sum up everything, grade 5, Americans faced many economic and personal hardships during the Revolutionary War. And second thing, women, African Americans, and Native Americans fought on both sides in the war. Okay, so I hope you've learned something in today's lesson, and please always stay safe. Bye for now and have a nice day.